Welcome to Just Your Normal Misfit. I'm Ann Thomas, and today's episode is about spaces. We finished the Manotsava 2025, and that was about physical spaces. But my guest today is going to talk about emotional spaces, places where we can take off our mask, exhale, and just be. Arpita has been pivotal in building a space when she felt that she didn't really find one where she could be safe. 5 years ago, Arpita began her journey of understanding her own neurodivergence. What started as self discovery led to a formal diagnosis and eventually to creating Fireplace, a safe and brave community that meets every second Thursday of the month. It's free, it's open, and it's filled with people who are learning to show up as they are. In our conversation today, we'll talk about belonging, we talk about neuroqueerness, vulnerability, and what it means to create and hold space for others, especially when the world doesn't always hold space for you. Welcome to Just Your Normal Misfit, Arpita. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
5 years ago, you started your journey on learning more about neurodiversity. Tell us more.
I was actually watching a TV show called Parenthood, and there was a young child called Max who was autistic, and there was another adult that Ray Romano was playing, and he figures out his own autism by looking at Max, and here I was, third in line, looking at them and going, hey, wait, I have those traits too. And so I went down a rabbit hole, which I realized is also a very neurodivergent trait later on, of just finding a passion and then running after it like Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole. And I started looking at neurodiversity, I started looking at different forms of neurodivergence, and I came to understand that I had multiple ones, and that also in our culture of the way that people are raised based on their genders, people assigned female at birth generally tend to have much more of a struggle understanding their own neurodivergence and also expressing it, because even in the research circles, research has tended, it's changing now, but has tended to be focused mainly on assigned male at birth people. And there's a lot of overlap there with masking that doesn't allow this neurodivergence to show up. So I started reading about that. And eventually I was like, okay, this seems like it fits for me.
You talked about two aspects right now, very specifically one about gender and one about masking. Do you want to unravel your understanding or your take on it?
Oh gosh. So you picked up on two very big topics. I'll start with masking because I think that's just easier to speak about. So masking is a trait that many of us actually have picked up over life. It doesn't even have to be necessarily around neurodivergence. I feel like all people are born across spectrums, and male and female, or masculine and feminine, are two ends of a spectrum. But we end up being somewhere. And many of us happen to identify very strongly with one or the other. And I also feel like that journey changes through life. So it's not like one specific way that we end up being through our lifetimes also. And similarly, I feel like with neurodivergence also, there are spectrums of existing, and they're not necessarily binary in the way that like masc and fem are, but we can call them constellations. So there are constellations of identities that sometimes people can, for instance, think like multiple thoughts at the same time, or sometimes people are very sensitive to things and then they are not easily able to process things, or sometimes writing becomes difficult, or there's like multiple ways of being, and we exist across these spectrums. And typicality in gender or in neurodivergence is essentially whatever the world has normalized. And people who fall under that umbrella have an easier time working with the way that things are. And this is also, again, constantly in flux, constantly changing. We live in modernity, which is very demanding and seems to be getting even more demanding as time goes by. But having said that, there are these ways of being anyway. So divergences, whether they're queerness or whether they're neurodivergences, generally I feel fall under the umbrella of people who identify as outside of that normality. And that's my understanding of gender and neurodiversity in general. And then masking is what we do to protect ourselves, essentially. Because as very young people, we start to realize that, okay, the world is a certain way and I have to fit in, otherwise, it's not going to work out. And so we try to see how other people are behaving, and then we more or less try to fit into that behavior. So, for instance, I remember as a younger person, I used to really struggle with playing downstairs because there were so many different kinds of people and they all had their own energies and things going on. And I didn't really know how to make sense of things. Sometimes people would say something and their body language would be completely different. And they were masking. And in trying to understand them, I was masking. And it was just such a nuanced thing that as a child, there's no way to articulate all of that. So maybe this happens to you or some of your viewers as well, that we're in a place, and if there was complete safety, then we would behave completely differently. For instance, right now I'm playing with this thing and it's calming me down and I'm working with it. Most of the time I'll keep it behind the scenes so that I'm masking. This is called stimming. It's one way of stimming. Sometimes it could look like moving a leg, or it could look like playing with a fidget spinner. Anything that basically, when we feel overstimulated, we find some way to release our energy. That was my very roundabout way to answer your question.
No, truly said, because what you said is, in my words, I just say the misfits, right? So even for us, sometimes the range that you're talking about, it doesn't even have to be from individual to individual. Just me, the first time, the moment I woke up to the person that's going to bed has gone through such a range of
Absolutely.
emotions, just being. And this, for you, I'll be this warm, nice, such a sweet human being. To my son, I'll be like, oh, mother of terror. To my husband, I'll be the cranky or the loving. It
Yeah.
changed. And if that is normalized, and if that is normal, and you and I understand that we change shades over the day, we change colors over the day, our mood swings through the day, then why can't people be different? What struck me when you spoke was the fact that as a child, as a younger person, when you went down, so I'm just thinking, how early does it begin? We are telling our kids that there is a form of gender that you need to be. A man, you're a boy, you need to be like this. You're a girl, you need to be like this. And the moment you've made that one mention, then it just spills over without you even realizing it, saying that, okay, is this boy like? Is this girl like? And I found that very interesting because in our heads, and when I talk about children, young children, I do believe that there's so much resilience, so much open mindedness, that children don't think these things, but we teach them these things. But is that, I'm just thinking about that. How soon is too soon?
Yeah, I wouldn't know honestly. I do want to say off the bat that I'm no expert at anything. Like, I just show up from my own experience and my own understanding in whatever reading that I've done, whatever people that I've met. But my understanding is that if children are allowed to be, then they don't really care. They're not like valuing pink and blue differently or trucks and Barbies differently. Like, it's such a dichotomized, clear-cut world that somehow we've made for them that doesn't leave space. And the problem occurs when people are genderqueer or when they're non-binary or when they're trans. They don't fit. And there's a very clear identity struggle there. And it's so unfair on those children, on those beings, to have to mask is a very mild term, but have to almost do violence to themselves, right? Because who they are authentically just is not what is true for them. And so I do wonder what there can be, I guess, spaces like this, like just more conversations, more openness, can hopefully build safe spaces. And you and I were talking about how we'd be looking at the Indian context, right, specifically. And yesterday I was looking at the history of queerness in India. And it's so bizarre because we're the land of Kama Sutra, right?
I
We're
was
the
waiting for
land.
that word.
Yeah, it's bound to show up
Yeah.
for the Khajuraho temple, if we're giving all the like common references. But so many temples like it. It's not the only one at all. There's many temples which have very normalized depictions of queer acts of sexuality. And there are references to lesbians, I believe, in the Rig Veda. So it's like everywhere. At a certain point in our history, Babur apparently was into a boy, and that was totally normal. And then we come to the British arriving here. 1861, they do the whole Section 377 business, which we're still struggling with. And suddenly, people feel like it's okay to just drop everything that's been normal in our society and be colonized, be okay with having this sort of really Catholic distinction of puritanical, this is okay, this is not okay. And it's just so odd to me because we've had this like long history, and then in 200 years, it's all undone. And now we have people who are just struggling with being seen by their families and by their people.
True. Because I always say that the Christianity may have done a lot of good according to whatever, but there is so many ways that we have just colored everything into the same shades, where we want to box everybody in that similar trait. What is unchristian? What is Christian? What is not? And people who just follow that this is how it was, and without actually a wink of what it was.
Yeah,
Right?
and it can get dangerous. Like we're also living in times where Hinduism is suddenly changing feather colors and all these things that are clearly there, written and in stone, literally, don't matter anymore. It's only the Manusmriti and nothing else. The politics of things is, I don't know, like religiosity is a complicated thing to get into because there is faith, which I think can be a very pure and a very clear thing, but which I feel is so much more personal. But when it becomes political and when it becomes mixed up with governance and the kind of directions that like large bodies of people and institutions are trying to drive, then it becomes a very different mind game
But
entirely.
religion is political. Everything about it is political, right? Today, if you and I choose to get married or not, is decided by religion and politics of it, right? You have one law which allows you to inherit property or not. If I am in a country, then my son will be my master. I cannot travel out of the country without my son's permission, who is 10 years old, probably. What is that? I raise him, yet I need his permission to travel to another country. Whether or not I drive as a woman gets chosen by somebody else. Whether or not I can exist gets chosen by somebody else. Whether or not I have a baby, whether or not I can get my tubes tied. There is so much about my body that is not determined by me. That combination of religion, politics, patriarchy, economics is a very scary place. And if, as a woman, I am here, as you have these very clear tiers that we are in, almost like the caste system. So
Yeah.
you have the man above everyone else, and then the woman, and then the others. And the others are not even acknowledged. So it is a very sad place to be. And even more painful that when we talk about neurodivergence and being queer, they travel a lot together. And sometimes finding somebody, if I go to a therapist and I say I need to get an assessment, let's get as simple as that. I need to find out if I'm neurodivergent, if I have a learning disability. Okay, can I have a conversation about my gender, my sexuality, or anything in a safe space without being insulted.
So the odds are stacked in a weird way right
Yeah.
now. I think according to a 2015 report, there were 0.3 therapists to every 1 lakh people in India. So 0.3. So even if
A
the
third
number
of a
has
human.
changed in the past decade, I doubt it's enough, right, for
Yeah.
the population that we have. And having said that, we don't have really good quality control around like who gets to call themselves a therapist.
Yeah.
So people can also, for instance, do a quick certificate and get onto the therapy bandwagon. And see, again, this is so complicated. I feel like everything I say has all these dimensions that I really want to bring into the conversation. Because on the one hand, it's really important to hold these safe spaces. But on the other hand, psychiatry has done a lot of harm, even from the beginnings of where it started to where we are right now. It started in the same place as eugenics, which is really the place where most famously Nazis were trying to figure out how to create the ideal people by destroying the not so ideal people. When we look at it like that, psychiatry has had a long history of criminalizing differences. So, hysteria, for instance, was recognized as a disorder of women being women. Yeah, and having
Yeah.
hysteria comes from uteruses. And homosexuality was criminalized until it wasn't. And even now, ADHD ends in disorder, and ASD is autism spectrum disorder. So we aren't recognizing the diversity of existence, but instead, even in psychiatry, there is a sort of looking down and pathologizing certain kinds of people. So that's one level. So then finding a therapist who's willing to work with neurodivergence, okay, but are they going to work in the way that they'll respect it? Or will it be from the point of view of
Fix
we
it.
need to cure it? Exactly. Because electroshock therapy and things like this are still real and still around in the world. So that's terrifying. So it's incredibly rare. Not that it doesn't exist. I have a therapist who is incredible and works with neuroqueering in a beautiful way. But it is very rare. And I have friends who struggle to find therapists who've been completely disillusioned by the experiences that they've had because of not finding the right person. So I do feel like we need more safe spaces that are also survival led, that are also experiential and based in peer support, which is coming up now very slowly, but it involves the experience of like lived experience being validated and valued. So hopefully that increases and grows.
I love how dark we went so quickly into our conversation, which is supposed to bring in hope for people, and
I
how
feel
both
like
of
that
us
happens
came
with us
together.
though.
Both of us came together, and we are like, oh, the world is dark.
But
And
have hope. It's nice to also recognize the darkness because then the light and dark they go together.
yeah. Coming back to something, given that you and I have had wonderful therapists who have, and we've made that journey and we figured that a magical place where we can go and have those same conversations. You went ahead and got a diagnosis. Do you want to tell us about that? How was the reaction to you finally having one for yourself and one for the people around you now that you had this paper which says, oh, I am this, and these labels that explain certain things? How was that emotion for you and for those around you?
Honestly, it was very underwhelming. Because for myself, I'd already come to a space where I recognized this about myself. So it was more receiving confirmation, which was nice to have. But it just felt like, why do I need someone else to be telling me things that I already know about myself? And part of it was also talking to other people and sharing that. And more often than not in society, I've noticed this sort of pity that shows up. And I was like, this is, I understand within the framework of the diagnosis that it shows up as disorders, but they're really not. It's just a way of being different. And even in the spaces that I inhabit or the work that I try to do, I think it's really important to focus on the resilience and to focus on the presence, to focus on the positivity that these experiences have brought to us. Because there's plenty of pity. Like, if we want to go into pity parties, then there are plenty of people available. And it's very easy, honestly, to get bogged down by these labels and feel like, oh no, poor me, like I'm struggling so much. And I've been there. I've been like, whatever, even is the point of going to very dark places. But ultimately, this is the life that's here now. And the question then becomes how to live that in a way that can be most beneficial to myself, to the people around me, to the world in general.
You started your journey learning about neurodivergence much before you got the assessment. So, as you mentioned, there was some clarity about who you were and how you were struggling to be, or what was great about being neurodivergent in a certain way. And you had figured the strengths and weaknesses. You've done your
Mm.
SWOT on your own, right? But is there something that once you found that language, you went in and you learned about it and you've been working on it for 5 years, and now you're working with other people as well, speaking
Yeah.
to more and more people, that language, how much did it ease things for you, and how much did it actually dig up more and take you deeper into a messier, murky place?
Well, now I'm doing my PhD in it, so definitely messier and murkier. But it's a place I enjoy being in because I feel like these things are incredibly complex. And it's not fair to reduce them to just labels or just yes and no answers. There's much more to it than that. And that's what I've been noticing even in spaces like Fireplace. What I've seen is that people come with our own constellations of being. So even if somebody is autistic and ADHD exactly like I am, they're not exactly like I am. They're doing their own thing. And there's really no way to chart these out specifically. And I've come to terms with that and think that's okay. Like, we don't need the labels to relate to each other. Yes, sometimes they help a lot. Like, we'll be having these conversations, somebody will say, oh, I just had this autistic meltdown today, and everybody in the room understands that immediately because there's a very clear understanding of what an autistic meltdown is. It's when there's sensory overload and the system can't take it, the body mind complex can't take it, and there is a meltdown, there is a breakdown in terms of not being able to handle things, and then you come back to being okay. So that common language has definitely made it easier to speak about things. It's like any other language, right? When you and I both understand tree and we're talking about a tree, we're like, okay, it's that brown thing with the green stuff on it. It helps and it doesn't help. And it's good to have that balance always at the top of your mind so that you don't get bogged down by labels and at the same time they're uplifting.
Keep talking about constellations, and I know that your website has a lovely one about you. Would you like to take us through it, talk about it?
So this website, I'm really happy to say, was made by my partner, who's also a designer and illustrator, and very talented, as you can see. So there's an interactive constellation on it, and each of these things are part of my identity. So what's up here right now is queer. My sexuality is not straightforward. And then there's neurodivergent. My brain works differently from normal or neurotypical. I'm femme, so I face the social injustice that comes from having a female body and the multiple aspects of having been that way. I'm fat, my body is judged for size. I'm brown, judged for my dark skin color and race. I'm urban, I was raised primarily in cities. I'm a survivor. I've been through child sexual abuse and lived with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm intercaste. I come from one caste of privilege and another of marginalization, and that has its own things. I'm a third culture kid, so I come from different cultural bloodlines and grew up across various places, so I don't belong to any one community. I speak English, and my first language is globally recognized. I come from the global south. We've had a bunch of colonial injustice. I've been through depression, and I still work with it. I'm eco-sensitive, so very sensitive to ecological trauma and impacted by pollution, construction, mining, quarrying, deforestation, all the fun things happening right now. I'm highly educated, so I have formal and informal degrees and diplomas and certifications, which is definitely a privilege. And yeah, those are the ones on here. So essentially, all of that to say that my identities and labels are complicated, and I have some privileges, I have some disadvantages, and all of that makes me me. And you're actually all welcome to create your own constellations like this and see what shows up for you, and if that can help you in some way to understand the different layers of who you are.
And it was really moving to see that, because though I have verbalized it in certain ways for myself, not any one thing is who I am, and not any one of them is who you are. And we are complex. And I love the constellation that you have created. And the moment I came onto your website, and I was like, oh, that's multiple ways of identifying yourself and recognizing that everybody goes through different aspects, and there are certain strengths to it and there are certain challenges to it, but that is who we are and that is what it is. There's no good or bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so thank you for showing us that as well. One part that you just said, where you said that I had an autistic meltdown, and we understand it and we get it, because you know what sensory overload feels like, and you know that you just need quiet, or you just need to get away from certain spaces or people or reactions. But these also today have become words that are used spitefully or jokingly, right? Stop being so autistic about things. And what do you have to say about that kind of language, where it is intended to insult, while there is no insult there, is the whole point that we're trying to make, because you and I are perfect the way that we are, of course. But how do we fix that? How do we bring a balance is something that I keep wondering.
It's just more and more communication and education as much as we can with other people, because this has been historically true. The word queer was used in 1894 as a homophobic insult, and it's so gay was has been used in my lifetime for making fun of things. And so these terms keep coming, people keep hitting on them, and then progress happens, and sometimes it doesn't, sometimes we regress depending on what's going on in the world. So I think in the overall scheme of things, a pinch of salt helps just to survive. But that's not to say that things don't need to change. Of course, they do. And we're working on it. The way I understand it and the way that works best for me is that doing work in smaller communities helps. If I try thinking about a million people, my brain doesn't have that capacity. Like, I just can't imagine what impacting a million people would look like. But 10 people I can talk to, and I can really have a conversation. And so that's where I come from, and that's what I try to do.
You talked about education and PhD. Tell us more. What are you PhDing in?
PhDing in neuroqueering. And what I'm hoping to do is, again, exactly like I told you, come together with a few people and talk about slowing down. That's what's on my mind right now. We live in a culture of hustle. We live in a culture of constantly trying to rush, be productive, do more, keep going, all of those things. And not in the sort of slow and steady way where we keep going, but in the like, how can I amp this up now that I've reached this level? Keep going. And I don't think it's healthy. I think it's really impacting us. And neuroqueering specifically has a lot of wisdom to give people, I feel, because we have these concepts of crip time and queer time, which is to say, like, time where for disabled folks, it's time that just has to go in a way that's not normal because there is no capacity for it. But we're creative and we're resilient and we find our ways. And similarly for queer people, like we don't follow the stages of development. You get married at this age and you have children at this age and then buy a house at this age and so on and so forth. We're creative about living our lives and there's a certain freedom in that. And so, how can we find conversations about slowing down together and offer something to others that might be of benefit? That's the idea. So I'm hoping to work with neuroqueer folks and figure it out together. I don't have all the answers.
Especially now when efficiency is the pinnacle of life. And I wear it like a badge of honor that if I can do five things at the same time, like all my life, I have always said that I always have 10 tabs open and 20 tabs open and three things going on. And with my partner in my life, he's just, what is up with you? There's always something that you're trying to fill space with, right? There's a little block in my calendar that's open. Come on, let's get a puppy. Come on, let's say something. Let's go do something. And that's how we are raised, right? That shows my value is in what I do for the world. My value is when I'm bringing value to you. There is no value in me alone, in me just being. My value comes from what I have to offer. And now, as an adult who is understanding things, and these two ideas are just fighting with each other. As a human being who's raised on a certain value and somebody who wants to create and wants her children to understand something different. I don't value my children because they get a certain grade home. I don't value my children because they will give me 5 hugs a day. I value them because they are very interesting people and they're just there and they bring joy and they bring a lot of emotions, but they exist, right? And it would be nice if they get good grades. It would be fabulous that I have to listen less of. But how do you get these two ideas to sync together is such a big challenge. I did not know about the time sequence terms that you have used. Do you want to elaborate or give it a couple of more such, share some more ideas about the neuroqueer folks or the terms that you've put through?
About neuroqueering, I was thinking about this when we spoke earlier and what can I put across that really shares experience. And I found a really lovely article on Queer Beat that I'll send you the link of so you can link it to this conversation as well by, I believe, Andrea Barua, if I'm saying their name right. They're a Tripura artist and author, and they've written a piece about when a queer person goes to the gynecologist. And it's beautifully done. It's like a graphic novel piece, and it talks about their internal dialogue as they go to the gynecologist. And so their neurodivergence is showing up, their queerness is showing up, and it really highlights the kind of experience I want to talk about. So that's a good place to just go look it up. So neuroqueering essentially comes from, like, inherits from disability studies and queer studies, and then has come into being only in 2000s-ish has it been developing. It's very new as a field, and in India, it's almost not looked at, a very new space. But the idea is essentially that there are a lot of people who have these overlaps between being neurodivergent and being queer. So that's the sort of noun space. Like people have claimed it as being neuroqueer, identifying as neuroqueer. And then there are people who look at it as a verb, like neuroqueering. So that is more looking at it in opposition to heteronormativity and neurotypicality. Again, big words, but essentially what that means is normal,
Being different.
normalcy, belonging to the normal in gender or in neurodiversity. And how do we then queer things? Like, how do we make things interesting and creative and out of the box? That's the question. And that's the struggle with defining these things, is that they're beyond definition also a
Yeah.
little bit because they invite that creativity to go beyond. And crip time and queer time are essentially ways of looking at temporality, where, like I said, it's just in a single day, how much can I do? So there's something called spoon theory. So it's this concept of how many spoons, like literally a spoon. If one were to look at it as energy, like how many spoons of energy do I have in a day and how many spoons does a task take? Some people find it easier to divide their day and look at it as, okay, let's say this conversation with Anne is going to take like 10 spoons because I have to be like really on it. But fulfilling my drinking 2 liter water quota will take 5 spoons because it's a low key kind of commitment that I've taken to go through the day. So if I can plan my day accordingly and have so many spoons, then that can help me get through the day in a way that I don't entirely deplete myself by the end of it. Again, this works for some people, not for some people, it just depends on how we are. But there are these different ways of finding care for ourselves and making sure that we're not exhausting ourselves, to make sure that we're able to do what we can with what we have, that we're able to go step by step. And offering this resilience to the world, I feel would be a very powerful way of doing things.
No, it's absolutely interesting and amazing the topic that you're going for as well. Just the fact that we are in a world where there is this manic sense of what is going to happen to us. AI has come. If I don't work harder, my job's being threatened. We are looking at wars happening. We're looking at so many things going on. And the ultimate outcome is that you do more, and you're running non-stop, while what we actually need is to stop and breathe and make sense of it. And so bringing that value or looking at the world in that perspective, first of all, fabulous idea, and I hope it's a great PhD there. And also the other aspect about spoons and about all of this, it involves this little bit of inward looking, right? It involves slowing down and saying, how am I feeling right now? Why am I overwhelmed right now? Am I happy? What is this emotion that I'm going through? And that is something that, as individuals in the Indian context, I don't think we've ever gone ahead and been taught or been asked. You grow up saying, have you done your maths paper? Have you packed your bags? Have you done your uniform? Have you put your things in? What did the teacher say? How are your marks in the test? Are you going for this class? Are you not going for this class? What do you plan to do in your life? But I don't think anybody has ever paused and said, how are you feeling, Anne? Are your spoons there? How many spoons do you require to keep going on? Or is the situation stressing you? This pausing and saying to myself that doing these three things is extremely emotionally taxing for me.
Mm-hmm.
For you, it might be taxes that are emotionally taxing. For me, it will be having a conversation with my child. And that also goes into, like you said, we go into write exam, get a job, get a house, get married, have a child. Nobody is pausing to say, do you have the spoons to take them through? I keep talking about Thomas, and he keeps reminding me, right? You're complicating life. You're complicating. You bring a dog in, an added emotion. You bring a child in, it's an added emotion. You want to bring a cat, you want to take care of us. It's all layers. And
Yeah.
sometimes we don't have the spoons for it. And this is me who's been told, make value, build value.
And
So
like you're saying, sometimes it's the internal dialogue that's the hardest to work with because we've been taught this, and now maybe the voices of the people who said all this stuff, those people aren't even around anymore to say things daily, but internally, those voices are constantly on, and that's the hardest struggle I find. How do we?
sleeping during the day, oh my God. Oh my God. I'd be looking at myself saying, you want a nap? You want to sleep during a working day? And now, as a 42-year-old woman, I'm extremely kind to myself if I say, okay, I cannot do this. I need to shut down right now. And that's a journey. And that's why I appreciate what you're talking about so much more, where you say that be kind to yourself, which talks about spaces. Tell us more about Fireplace.
Fireplace. It came about in 2023, and it was because I'd been attending. So during COVID, I started attending spaces like self-care spaces, and mostly what I found was in the US. So I'd wake up at 4 in the morning and then I'd show up at these things, and it really wasn't working for my sleep and stuff. And I wasn't finding spaces that were exactly aligned to what I wanted to be doing. And so I thought, okay, let's just start something, we'll see what happens. I started Fireplace, and it's been what, almost 3 years now, and it's a beautiful space. It's a small community, and people show up. So we meet for 2 hours. We have our introductions, and then we have these guidelines and agreements, which are essentially something that we've created and co-created over time to talk about the safety and the bravery aspects. To talk about like privacy, confidentiality, honoring each other, just coming from a space of play and presence. So there's multiple parts of it that just make sure that when we show up, we really show up for each other, that we're not just there to take a space for granted and go. Because I've also noticed sometimes this can happen with free of cost spaces, that people take it for granted and come and go as they like. But this is not exactly that. Like, it is a very mindful, very intentional space that we've built. And then we have check-ins. So we talk about, each of us gets a few minutes and we talk about what's been going on in the month for us and how we're doing. We take a break and then we come in with various topics. So everybody comes together to decide which topic we're going to talk about next month. And then someone decides to facilitate or co-facilitate or whatever. And they take that hour, and it can be art-based work, it can be movement-based work, there can be breath work, there can be just conversation, like really rich conversation, crowdsourcing for ideas. So we've had conversations about neurodivergence and shame, asking for help, vulnerability, like all sorts of just anything basically that people want to talk about coming up for them in their lives. We take it up, and really a conversation is never over. An hour is not enough. So yeah, we keep taking things up and moving from there.
Interesting. Why Fireplace?
Because Fireplace brings up, at least for me, a space of warmth, of sitting by a fire and just like cuddling together and having that kind of really
Since we were talking about it, because I'm like, I want a fireplace in my home. All these shows have fireplaces and why, but I get what you mean.
in my head, this is strange. I'm only thinking of it now that you asked me. In my head, it's a bonfire kind of situation, like a group of people huddled around a fire.
I imagine the bonfire only when you spoke about it. In my head, the fireplace is the one that we,
Yeah, that Angrez
the
one.
Victorian.
Bonfire didn't feel as cozy as fireplace, so yeah, fireplace it was.
Okay, tell me about safety and bravery.
So that's a term that I first heard of in an emergent strategy training. Emergent Strategy is a book that's by author Adrienne Marie Brown. And then that became like a whole thing, and there's multiple books in that series. It speaks about safe and brave spaces. And I was very intrigued by that term because it speaks about not just feeling safe, which is the basic expected thing in a community space, but bravery in terms of vulnerability, in terms of showing up, in terms of having the courage to say, you know what, this terrifies me, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that safety and bravery has helped me well through the time that anything, honestly, like even now when I show up for this conversation, I'm making sure that this feels safe and brave, that I'm saying things that are outside my comfort zone. Not to the point where I stretch myself so much that it hurts me, but making sure that I do show up, that I do something meaningful.
It could not be easy to be a listener where people are being safe and brave at the same time. Because when you're being brave, there's a lot that you could talk about. And there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of how do you make sure that you're ready to carry that piece?
First of all, I'm never alone in Fireplace. I started it, but it's not just me anymore. Technically, if we're having a conversation about Fireplace, we should have the whole gang together. We all carry it together. That's one piece. And the second is that it's very important to me that it's not about re-traumatizing, which can happen. So this was a conversation I had with my therapist recently, and it was very valuable when we were talking about spaces. And they were like, very often when people have been through trauma in spaces, it can become about like bonding over trauma and re-traumatizing sometimes in the process of doing that. And I really don't think that's what Fireplace is about. We have a lot of, I can't think of a better word than mechanisms, which sounds really technical, but we have a lot of things in place that make sure that it's the resilience aspect that shows up. So we'll have really playful conversations. Sometimes we won't even go necessarily into the thing that traumatized us, but we'll talk about how are we feeling now and what are things we can do to move forward. So it's very important to make sure that we're in the presence of where we are when we're working. And that's how Fireplace generally tends to be. So, yes, difficult conversations show up, but we're always trying at the end of it to leave people in a space that is supported.
Something about trauma that I think a lot of people misunderstand, and I think Gabor Mate was able to clarify it for me. That statement I heard quite a long time back, and he said that trauma is not bad things happening to you, right? Because that's every day. But trauma is being alone in the bad things. It's not feeling supported through the bad things and not being seen or felt or heard. I think the moment you create a community, it's not about re-traumatizing, as you said. It's about understanding perspectives. It's about feeling heard, feeling seen, and also perspective sharing. Sometimes we can be so blinded by our own, one of the shortcomings of being on either the spectrum or an ADHD is the rejection sensitivity that you feel constantly. Somebody must have given a feedback and you will think that it is very personal and they were trying to attack you. How do you balance that? And sometimes getting that perspective that probably the person in front of you was not trying to harm you. And just that perspective sharing, I think, becomes very important.
I mean, you've got the gist of it, honestly. More often than not, like we had two sessions that we worked on asking for help. So in the first session, we spoke about what does asking for help, like what stops us from asking for help. And it really made us think. We came to a space until someone said, we haven't really spoken about practical ways to ask for help. We'll do one more session. We said, okay. Then we did one more session. And in that one, we had some practical responses, but mostly everybody coming together to say, you know what, I really struggle to ask for help. So,
Yeah.
so it was about not feeling alone in
Yeah.
that situation.
Yeah, which comes to my next question just went into it. Like there is so much shame associated with disability. There
Yeah.
is so much shame associated with the idea of I don't know how to do this or I can't seem to figure this out. To be able to jump out of that, how do we do that? How do these conversations enable us to do that? What have your learnings been in that space?
Honestly, it's like being a parrot and repeating the same phrase again and again. But yeah, realizing that we're not alone can go a long way in working with shame. So I think it was Brene Brown, who is a shame researcher, who's also
Yeah.
spoken about shedding light on shame really makes it step back because that is the antithesis. That's been so much of my learning. And yeah, just for me, listening to people show up every day, despite the kinds of things that they go through. Because when you go into a community like this, you also hear about so many different lives and situations. And when you realize all the things that people are going through and they're still showing up, it's wow, I am so proud of you. And I want to be like you, and you inspire me. And that carries us through the month, I feel. Like, just it's magical seeing people's resilience take them through things. And I think in that way, we empower each other as well to move forward and to keep going.
How big is the group when you come together?
It's an open space, so anybody can come, but more often than not, it's tends to be around 10 people.
And it's an online program you
It's
mentioned.
an online thing, yeah. It's a Zoom
Yeah.
meeting.
So it's a Zoom meeting. It's every Thursday, every second Thursday of the month.
Every second Thursday of the month from 7 to 9 p.m.
7 to 9 p.m. And this is not just for neuroqueer people, it's for neurodiverse, it's for neurotypical, it's for anybody who wants
For
to
anybody.
come and share and be. I know when we talk about these aspects, especially if you look at different shows that you have seen recently, we've seen a lot of these interesting shows that are coming up about people on the spectrum and them navigating life, etc. And even with the idea with the podcast, when I do a search, I always get perspectives which are US based and who are talking about IEPs with learning disabilities and how people will create that IEP and work with the students, or you talk about so many aspects that is so unreal for us. You're like, oh, I'm in Kolkata where most children with ADHD are just medicated. And that's the trend, right? And I have not met a single child with a learning disability with an IEP, or just different Indianisms of ours. Are you talking about spoons to your parent? Just imagine doing that. How many spoons do you have, Dad, today? You're like, what? One pataka for you. Yeah. So, is family and that cultural context a big part of the fireplace? Does that come up a lot?
So Fireplace is definitely chosen family. It's a place that we all can, and this comes up every once in a while, that people do struggle with family and we come together to support each other. And that concept we've picked up from the West quite happily of chosen families because there's no compulsion, right? Nobody's making anyone be there. Anybody who shows up because they like to, or because in that month they feel the need to, they need support, and that space is always there. That's where we really find the kind of family that we're looking for and that we choose again and again. So that's how Fireplace works out.
And in terms of friends and family, how do they look at your identification as somebody who's neuroqueer, and not only identifying, but running a space or leading a space called Fireplace? What has their reaction been?
Mixed reactions. So with family, there's somewhat of a distance, except for my sibling. She's very much part of Fireplace. My partner as well is part of Fireplace. But friends, yeah, like I think the thing that kind of has ended up happening to me over time is the more I identified with my authenticity and the more I've been showing up in expressing it, there's been a shift in the kind of people who want to hang out with me and the kind of people who are like, okay, we can't do you without the masking parts. And I'm okay with that. I'm happy with that shift. So now the people who are around are the ones who are really okay with me being exactly as I am, which works out really well for me.
So, what's your advice there? Because we keep asking people to be their authentic selves, to throw away the mask, but there are consequences. There are real consequences of throwing away the mask, right? At a workplace. People may not be comfortable with that, or just how do you navigate that loss that comes with you taking off the mask and bringing your authentic self?
I would always value safety first. If it doesn't feel safe to remove a mask, then don't. Like a mask is like any other tool, honestly. And I'm not recommending a lifetime of never masking because that would be dangerous in the kind of world that we live in. But what I'm saying is if you can find some spaces where you can be safe, where you can take your mask off to whatever degree that you can find, then that is incredibly valuable. And key always for me comes in at communication. And it's that vulnerability and that courage that we were talking about. So to be able to say, you know what, at this moment, I'm not able to show up because I have really bad PMS and the struggle for me, and I just can't. And trying it out a little by little, drop by drop, and then seeing who responds and who doesn't. It's really a very long term, slow, and hopefully not jarring process to go through of just seeing, okay, who are the people who are genuinely here for me, who are the ones who understand. and who take that space as well, because boundaries go both ways. So I also don't want to be the kind of person that asks everybody for help, but I'm not there for anybody else. So, how do we make that happen? And it's a lifelong process, I think.
No, I get where you're coming from and safety. But there are these emotions that you really thought and hoped that this one person would really get me, would really be there. And then they are not. And then there's a lot of heartbreak. How do you acknowledge that grief or recognize that grief and work with it? Anything from personal experience?
So personally, for me, that would look like being the black sheep in my family often. And it's just trying to understand the choice and the consequences of the choice and keep talking to myself again and again about what that choice means. And of course, the emotions show up, at which point it can look like journaling, going into nature, talking to community. Like there's so many tools that one really has to develop to hold space for oneself as well. So it can look like art, it can look like sports, it can look like music, it can look like dancing, but whatever is a creative outlet, just some sort of resource to embody the emotion and release it. I think that's a good space to have.
Finding your own tribe and finding your own emotional spaces or creative outlets,
Absolutely.
cooking,
Yeah,
dance,
exactly.
whatever brings you joy. And that's how we deal with any form of grief. Yeah. Yeah. If I had to ask you from your experience now of running Fireplace for the past 2 years, if I wanted to build a safe space in my classroom, and I understand the challenges of a classroom, but if there is something that I could change about my classroom today, what could that be so that people will find it a little more safe to be and unmask?
Really simple things that come from my experiences, asking people, giving people respect. Yeah. So saying, asking people, what are your pronouns, for instance, or saying, what can I address you as? Because sometimes people have chosen names, they have pronouns that are different from he and she, which can be assumed. Or talking about, I don't know how much this applies to a classroom, but making sure that what they say stays with you. So maintaining confidentiality and privacy. So ways to actions really speak louder than words. I guess the proverb is there for a reason. Like just making sure that you uphold their identity in the highest regard. I think people feel it and they respond in kind as well. So that would be my 2 cents. But you would have to try it out and let me know if it worked or not.
Tell us a little bit about your home front, your partner. How has life been for you there?
So I've lucked out on the partner that I have. We found each other quite randomly at 17, and we've grown up together really. So we've spent more than half our lives together. And because of that, I think we really understand each other and we give each other a lot of space to just explore the identities that are coming up. Through our lifetimes, we've both changed so much in who we are, what we think, what we believe, what our philosophies are, the people we'd like to surround ourselves with. And the main thing that has stayed, I think, is respect again, and making sure that I respect him for who he is and what he believes, and he does the same for me. And everything else, I guess, and sense of humor. Those are the two things. Because sense of humor will always carry you a long way.
It couldn't have been easy, right? Because both of you, with your identities and in a world, taking that dynamic forward, which is always, as we said, there's a lot of shame, there is a lot of guilt that is thrown across if you do anything that's not the normal. How have you both managed to navigate that?
By being honest as much as possible and talking to each other as much as possible, trying to communicate even when it didn't feel right or it didn't feel
Comfortable.
like it, yeah, like it would come easily. Fighting a lot. Honestly, if somebody asks me, I feel like fighting is the root of a relationship because it's so important to just go at it and then try to untangle whatever has shown up. And I this respectfully. I don't mean like fighting, but genuinely showing up and disagreeing and then finding commonalities, then moving forward. And like I was talking to you about vocabularies, the more we've grown, the more we've read about those labels, concepts that help us identify different parts of ourselves. We've been able to bring that into conversation. So now a very common conversation at home is, I don't have the spoons to do this. Can we do it later? Just and then the other person has that capacity to understand, okay, like there are no spoons, so maybe another time. Or we might, if we know we're going to have a difficult conversation, we go on a walk. Because for us, that really works, like to be in movement, to be in an outdoor space that's not contained. So every relationship might figure out its own tricks and ways, hacks around how to contain the differences.
I have to say this, whenever we used to have an argument, Thomas would just shut down. And so there's no fight it out, right? There is frustrated me who's saying something to you, and frustrated him who's just going to not speak about it. And it has taken over the years in speaking to each other and talking to each other and working with therapy and things like that, where we say that because I am on super fast train and he is on a very slow cart, and somehow the speeds have to match at some point for us to come through. So both of us have worked that he will come back to that conversation whenever he's ready quickly, and I have learned to be patient for as long as he needs till he gets to that point. And it's work, and it's two people working together trying to have that. There's no perfect answers, there's no perfect way to go about it, and it's a lot of conversation. I love how you talk about conversations and going through it and being honest and being respectful, and probably outside among the trees or the people, so that you don't even get tempted to punch each other. But just kidding.
Oh,
But
you figured it out.
yeah, I figured it out. Yeah. Any message for anybody, Arpita, that you would like to leave before we wrap up?
I think just try to be kind to yourself and try to be honest about who you are and how you feel as much as you can. There's no pressure. That's the thing to, I think, really remember is that there is no pressure and we can do things at our own paces, and that's okay. There is allowance for that, there is permission for that. I'm absolutely not coming from a holier than thou space, but I have come to learn that sometimes permission is the hardest thing to access. And if somebody benefits from this permission coming from our conversation, then that would be a job well done.
Just to reiterate, we had planned this conversation last week, and thankfully both of us are today in this space where we know that some days we just don't have the energy or the mental space or the bandwidth to have the conversation. And I am grateful that we both have been open with each other and saying that, okay, today cannot be done and we will do it when we are ready, because it's very important to come to people with that honesty and with that respect for each other. And I can't imagine me coming and sitting in front of when I'm not 100%, because it needs to be done, which is what old Anne would do. And I'm sure you would have said, let me push through and make it happen because I've given my word. But the fact that we gave each other permission to say, can we reconvene? Can we do this later? I think it just makes for a better conversation and we can leave this feeling better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for just holding space the way that you have and making this conversation feel so easy. I feel like we're just chatting, like it doesn't feel like we're doing anything different except for the recording is on. So more people are part of it. It's been lovely.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much, because only if you show up, and if you show up honestly and truthfully and give your perspective. And I know you were very worried that you are not an expert. And I'm very grateful that your expertise is not what we are looking for. We are looking for your experience, because just as you sit here today, there are so many other people who may not have the vocabulary, who may not have the access to talk about the things that you have lived and felt. And that's why it's important to have that, and that's why it was so important to have you on Just Your Normal Misfit. Thank you so much, Arpita.
Thank you. And you and people are always welcome to Fireplace, or if anyone just wants to reach out to me about neuroqueering experience, I'm here.
That's fabulous. what you've built with Fireplace is an amazing community. I hope our listeners, our viewers, and we have more than 500 of them, yay for that, will hopefully log in. I will put in all the details. And if you're feeling unseen, if you're feeling unsure, if you're feeling confused as to where should I start, how do I start, probably just log in and see where the conversation goes. And if you need, be an Arpita, start your own Fireplace, create your own community where people find space and hold space for each other, and just take care of yourself. Be kind. Being a misfit means that you were never meant to fit into something that's smaller than you. The world's quite large and there's space for all of us. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Arpita. Till we meet next time. Bye-bye.